Right back into this issue of what civic technology can do and what the role of big companies is in civic technology. And is Jim here and with his team? Okay, Jim, bring your panel out. Jim Fallows, who we're really honored to have, one of the great journalists of the world and really a friend of mine and somebody I tremendously respect, who not only is expert in America but also in China. He lived in Shanghai for years and works at the Atlantic. I'm going down this way, so I'll get out of everybody's way. Right. But anyway, take it away, Jim.
Great.
Look forward to this conversation.
Thank you, David. Thanks to Alex and Simone and all the team that's put this event together. I found it really interesting today, and I think this next panel is going to pull together and extend some of the themes we've heard starting this morning. I'm going to set this up in just 90 seconds or so with something that my wife Deb and I have been doing for the last 2 years, which positions me to ask questions of our panelists. I can't think of a better lineup of people, whom I'll say more about each of them before I call them to speak. For the last 2 years, my wife and I have been flying around the country in our little propeller plane, which is how we got here last night to Coleman Young Airport in downtown the Detroit City Airport, looking at communities that have found ways to cope with the economic and political and cultural and demographic and climatological shocks of recent years, and seeing what it is in community fabric that makes them able to respond or not. We've been to Vermont and Mississippi and Central Valley, California and Montana, and you name it. It's been really, really fascinating. There are two themes we've seen among many that are really relevant to what we've been discussing previously today. One is a fascinating reverse talent migration. If you read the popular press, you think that every ambitious young person in the country is going to Boston, New York, DC, Seattle, the Bay Area, LA, and a few others to Chicago or Miami or San Diego or whatever. It's been fascinating to see people like the ones we've heard about coming to Detroit, who've decided that Sioux Falls, South Dakota, or Greenville, South Carolina, or Burlington, Vermont, or parts of Mississippi are the places where they can realize their ambitions because of the related factor I'm going to mention, which is, we heard again about Detroit, the importance of cheap real estate as a factor in urban development. In the 6 cities I mentioned on the coast, real estate distorts everything in life. In the rest of America, real estate is a bargain, and people are using that to start arts districts and startups and manufacturing centers, and it's been really interesting to see that. The other theme we've seen, which is connected to our subject of engagement for this panel, is the sort of stark disconnection between a sense of real pessimism about, disaffection from, despair about national level politics in the United States, where regardless of your political affiliation, you can't feel too good about the way we are choosing leaders or deciding on issues of national import. And the opposite sense of connection at the civic level, people in their neighborhoods, in their cities, in their regions, sometimes their states, feeling as if we can do things here, we're using new tools, we can make a better future. I could go on and on about what this means in Fresno or in Columbus, Mississippi, but instead, I'm going to use this as the setup to say, well, we've heard different themes about that by speakers today, about the sense of people feeling engaged and then feeling empowered to reinvent their cities, as Peter Hirschberg was telling us about, or reinvent manufacturing sites, as we heard about in the panels, or reinvent entire cities, as is happening now in our site of Detroit. So we're going to hear from 4 panelists who, in complementary ways, have expertise on this question of engagement at the neighborhood, city, regional, state, and even national or international levels, and the role of technology in making that possible. I'm going to say a word about each of them before introducing them. I'm going to start with John Webb of Google, who has been has produced a really fascinating study on this point of what we know about the state of civic engagement right now, how technology can both assess it and can enhance it in various ways. What is the formal name of your team at Google in the New York?
It's the Civic Innovation Team.
Civic Innovation Team. You're being involved in election coverage and ways to promote democratic engagement around the world. Start us off, please, by telling us what we should know about the state of engagement in the United States, or let's start with the United States.
Sure. So our research was conducted in the United States. It was a combination between qualitative and quantitative, so a survey of 2,000 US adults, but also over 100 in-depth interviews with people from across the country. And we were looking into basically the main question of what motivates people to do things that are civic, and what holds them back when, even if they care about something, maybe passionately or deeply, but they don't take action. And so that's what we were really trying to dig into. And what we found is about half of the US adult population can be classified as interested bystanders, or a segment that we're calling interested bystanders. People who they're paying attention to issues and things that are happening around them. They're following the news, but they might not be taking regular action civically in any sort of meaningful way or voicing opinion. And really, I guess one of the key insights is that people take action in the public sphere when it aligns with their self-interest. Right?
As shocking as that might be.
It's not a shocking thing, but and especially if they have personal or professional experience to bring to bear. Or they're also folks who are getting emotional fulfillment from doing these sorts of civic activities. And so we're looking at how can we use elections as sort of a springboard to get people more engaged on a community level at Google. And it's really interesting. Some things that the research uncovered is that a lot of people are signing petitions. That's a very thin form of civic engagement and sort of the collectivism thing. But the vast majority of people we asked couldn't remember the subject of the last sort of petition that they signed. They feel that they have the most power and efficacy on the local level, yet they're only really voting in national elections and not on the local side. So there's some of these disconnects there, and this is sort of what the research goes into.
Just ask you one follow-up before I turn to Lauren Hood to tell us about Detroit. Is there any way to infer from your studies whether the situation of engagement is getting better or worse over time? The conventional wisdom is Americans have given up, et cetera. Do you have any sense of the time trends based on your data?
No, but I think my hope and goal would be to conduct further research that we can compare. But just real quick, the level of sort of descriptions when people described to us what they did recently that they would consider civic, it was a broad range, and people were doing all sorts of things, mostly volunteering, either continuously with a particular organization or group, or for one-time events. And so I think there's still a lot of participation out there. It's just not necessarily in this sort of traditional political civic sphere. It's more on the local community side. And I think there's a lot of hope.
Great. So John Webb has told us about the overall picture of interested bystanders at the national level in the United States. We're now going to turn to a Detroiter born and raised, as you said, Lauren Hood, who has recently received an appointment as the acting executive director of Live 6. Is that correct? So
That's
congratulations.
Right. Thank you.
One of many community engagement projects you've specialized here over the years. Your LLC is Deep Dive Detroit, which has been involved in many ways of connecting people with their communities. Tell us how the national trend that John Webb was describing and what you've heard during the day from the mayor or for Garland Gilchrist or for others about whether Detroit is redeveloping its fabric and its fiber. Tell us how that seems from your point of view and how technology affects it.
Okay, I may have missed a little bit of that earlier. But what I can speak to is I think locally there are two different tracks of community engagement. So I think that people that come here from other places, people that have resources, access to more resources, and other people that have resources get involved in the civic field because they feel like it's their duty, that's what they're supposed to do. You can come here and get a little bit of recognition for that. But I feel like native Detroiters kind of get involved. It's like a means of survival. So people get involved in water activism because their water got shut off. People get involved in foreclosure crisis because their house got foreclosed on. So they get involved in some kind of counseling effort. So I feel like locally in communities that are more under-resourced, it's a necessity. Whereas when you come here from somewhere else, it's like, oh, I think it's cool to be civically engaged. I'm going to do that. And we here, I don't know about our media machine, likes to feed attention in that direction as well. So people are like, oh, I can get my 15 minutes in and do some good. So I'm going to get involved in that civic sphere. So it's motivated by different things.
And over the past decade of, there's been pressure on Detroit for decades, but over the past decade of bankruptcy and all the rest, have the people who've stayed become more engaged, either because they want to or because they have to?
People that stayed?
Yeah.
Well, it depends. I feel like there's a select group of people that stayed because it was a choice. Like, I can leave and go wherever I want, but I feel like a lot of people stay because they have no other options. They can't afford to leave. So Detroit gets bad, they have to tough it out because they have no resources to go somewhere else. So I feel like people that are here who are in that sort of need state, the reason they may not be engaged is because they're in survival mode. There's some people that don't even have their basic needs met.
Right.
So thinking about how they can be fully actualized and like get involved in the civic sphere isn't even on their radar because they need food, shelter,
Great.
basic needs.
Thank you. So we've heard the national perspective, we've heard the Detroit perspective, both people who are coming here and choosing to take part and those who are surviving and doing what they can, get engaged that way. We're going to hear now from Jen Crozier, who's IBM's Vice President of Global Citizenship Initiative and has been involved in leading many of IBM's philanthropic involvements in the United States and around the world. She helped devise the Corporate Service Corps at IBM, which is kind of is that a IBM specific or broader?
IBM.
As kind of executive
It's our
Peace
version
Corps?
of the Peace Corps.
This is of particular importance to me. My wife, Deb's parents, worked in something called the International Executive Service Corps, which is a version of this. They went to Korea and Indiana, Indonesia, and all the rest. And you're overseeing the World Community Grid, too. You launched a project here yesterday in Detroit. And I wonder if you would tell us about that project in particular, and more generally, IBM's and your views of the way that technology, big data, big companies can affect this process of civic engagement.
Sure. So one of the programs I get to oversee is called Smarter Cities Challenge. And we basically ask mayors around the world, if you had a team of 6 IBM executives for 3 weeks to tackle any problem you like for free, what would you want them to work on? And over the last 4 years, we've received applications from 700 mayors around the world. We've sent teams to 118 cities globally, representing about a $70 million investment. This year, Detroit applied, and what Mayor Duggan and the Land Bank teed up as the high priority issue was blight and specifically debris removal. So this huge issue that the Land Bank has, they own 86,000 properties now that have been vacated. And so they were one of over 100 applications we received this year. We chose them, and just yesterday the team arrived. The team's from all over the world and brings a lot of different kinds of skills. We hopped on a van yesterday and took what they called the Blight and Debris Tour, which was really an unbelievable experience, and I highly recommend it to anyone. And it was very interesting to see that and to kind of think about, which pieces of this do we think that technology and analytics will be able to help with, and which pieces really have nothing to do with technology. But it became very clear, given the scale of the issue, that civic engagement is critical. And I think that one of the things the mayor has been so extraordinary at, from pre-election, is having those living room meetings, connecting with the influencers in different communities, activating pastors in churches and heads of community groups and so on. And so one of the things that we think about with this is, what's the social media equivalent of that? Who is the pastor of Facebook? Who is the influencer in these spheres? And we're really lucky with this particular grant. This is our first one that we are sharing with Twitter. So Twitter has given a data grant as well to this team and is partnering with us on this engagement. So we'll be able to use Twitter data and social sentiment analysis as the team goes through and helps to figure out how they can assist.
Great, thank you. And how long will this project run, and what will be the sign of its success should it succeed?
It's a 3-week program.
Yep.
I sort of describe it as part pro bono consulting, part reality TV show, because the 6 people all live together intensely, and they have a conference room at the Land Bank.
It can't fail.
Yeah. The success really has to do with the recommendations they give to the Land Bank, and if the Land Bank's able to use those, right? So can they sustain the momentum of those recommendations once the team departs?
Great, thank you. And now to round out this opening round of framing the issue for us, we have Anne-Marie Levins, who's the General Manager for Microsoft's Technology and Civic Engagement efforts, based in Cambridge, Mass, rather than in Seattle. I think Anne-Marie is probably the only one in our presence here who is simultaneously a lawyer, a PhD, and a former Supreme Court law clerk. If there's anybody else here who has that trifecta, you can raise your hand. You've also been involved in thinking about the connection between Microsoft's enormous data tools and the social and civic and environmental problems around the world. Tell us how you and Microsoft think about this question of applying the skills you have to these challenges of civic engagement, especially at the city level.
So we think technology can be a huge tool to help solve cities' problems, but it's not up to us to define the problems. It's up to us to bring the tools to help solve them. So the way we've been approaching this is by going to local communities, working with the local civic organizations, working with folks in mayor's offices, nonprofits, to try to understand and scope what is it that's really going on here and how can technology help solve those problems. And you know, it's been remarkable to see how much is happening in neighborhoods and how the opportunity that technology and civic engagement brings to change dynamics in neighborhoods and get things done at a neighborhood level. So for example, in Boston, where you know the Seaport District has been very successful as an innovation district over the past 5-6 years. Lots of companies, lots of money, lots of great things happening. Other parts of the city that have been historically underserved and not so successful, like Roxbury, all of a sudden are on the radar now. The city of Boston has invested in renovating a beautiful old building there to make it the headquarters of the Boston schools. They've also opened an innovation space. So we're partnering with the local innovation community there to try to understand how can we help drive local entrepreneurship, do things in that neighborhood. And same things are happening in other cities, in Chicago and San Francisco and lots of different places. So I think from our perspective, being able to really help at a micro level in an organic way of dealing with the community is what's most important.
And when Microsoft people brag to themselves about the biggest impact they've had in some society or in some city or in civic engagement, what's the example they use?
Oh, there are a lot. I'd say it goes from a range. For places like in the city of Seattle, where we took a very traditional institution, the library, and helped them develop a library to business entrepreneurship program, to a place like Chicago, where we're helping them do a green infrastructure project with sensors. So it's kind of a range of things. I couldn't put my finger on one thing.
On the library front, I'll say one of the themes that Deb and I have seen in our travels and that Deb has written about a lot is the way that libraries, which seem like yesterday's institution, are in fact at the center of civic revival in many places. They have 3D printing operations and maker spaces. Something I didn't know and Deb found out is that when Andrew Carnegie was starting his libraries, they often had bowling alleys and bars in them with the idea that this would be places of civic gathering. So there's still some room to grow. I'm going to ask a question that is technology related, and I'm going to build up towards well, there are 3 technology companies, but I'm going to go first with Lauren, then John, and then to Jen and Anne-Marie, asking essentially, is the claim about technology's importance for civic engagement, is it BS or not? And let me frame the question a little more carefully. Martin O'Malley, as some of you may know, is running for president of the United States. Not everyone knows that, but he is. And he's written an autobiography, which I've read, although it hasn't been published, saying that his claim to fame is applying metrics to Baltimore. He was measuring trash collection. He was measuring potholes. He was doing some of the things we heard about from the mayor here. And he claims that despite Baltimore's recent well-advertised problems, this made a big difference in the texture of people's lives in Baltimore. So technology involves sensing of things. It involves quick feedback to civic complaints, et cetera. So I'm going to ask first, starting with Lauren, your sense as you think about the challenges for Detroit, is technology a sort of a bottom part of the things you care about, or is it higher up in terms of things that could make a difference in your life here?
Well, it's subjective. Who are we talking about? Is it important to people that are struggling or people that are making decisions how to fix the problems in the communities that are struggling? I don't know. I guess I feel like I need it. It's like something I carry in my arsenal. If I have to go to a funder and say, okay, here's the problem, they're going to be like, oh, well, I feel bad that that person is going through something, but haha, here's the data. Then it's like funding. So it's a tool that you need to have with you, but I feel like people that are most impacted by the data, like the people that you're counting, the people that you're surveying, it probably doesn't mean much to them.
And the people who are on the sort of the hard luck side of Detroit's story in the past decade.
Which is most of the city.
Which is most of the city. what technological changes have made any difference to them, do you think, if any?
That's tricky because I'd like to pretend that I'm super connected to that community, but I interact in this sphere. So I go to some community meetings and I know some people that are really struggling. Like one app I can think of, there's something you can use not on a smartphone. You can have a flip phone and find out when your bus is coming. Like that's the example that all my tech friends throw out. I'm like, how are you helping anybody? They're like, what about the one that helps the people know when the bus is coming? So there's one. If anyone else knows of any more, that would be great, but that's always the example that gets thrown out
And
there.
to push once more here, Martin O'Malley's big claim was that he reduced crime in the highest crime areas largely through
Data doesn't
data.
reduce crime. Tell me how that magic happens. Like,
I'll spare you his speech on that. So well, let me now ask John. You've studied the ways in which people feel engaged or not in the life of their country, in their state, in their city. How much you're measuring this with technology, but how much does the technology of this era make a difference in improving it, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think there is some traction. We heard from the mayor this morning just about See, Click, Fix and some of the tools and systems that they're using to help people communicate with their government. But there's so much more to do, right? So many of sort of the processes are frankly broken with community meetings, the way that they're run. They're often, the agendas published in a PDF the day before. They're not streamed live. They don't resonate with millennials. There's a role technology could certainly play there. And then I would also say that as technologists in the civic tech space, we have a lot more work to do to better understand the needs of the people that we're designing these interventions and solutions for. Like what problem is this technology actually helping somebody solve? And we need to get into their shoes, understand their perspective in their lives. And as a user researcher, that's sort of what I evangelize. But I think it's really important rather than what has historically happened, where we have access to these pools of data and we free and open them up. But we don't really understand like how people are using that information or how we can design interfaces and interactions that are usable and useful for them.
So John Webb has very nicely made the segue from what Lauren was saying to the question I want to ask Anne-Marie Levin. So you've heard Lauren saying that for many people in Detroit, technology seems just to be going over their heads. Right. John is saying that he wishes the companies knew better what people needed. You represent probably the largest consumer technology company now. How do you respond? What does Microsoft do? How could it respond better to people who feel as if they're not connecting, technology's not connecting with their civic life?
Well, I'm not sure it's a consumer question, really. It's more a citizen resident question on how can technology help them. I just have to say one thing first about the police or the crime issue. Because Lauren is right that data isn't going to reduce crime, but data in the hands of people who can make data-driven decisions about how to apply resources and when to intervene can reduce crime, and it has in many places. So I don't, that's not the whole story.
And do you two agree on that? Do you agree?
I'm halfway there with you. Like I'm working with the CompStat people here locally, so I understand the process.
Yeah. And I think partly that also answers your other question, that if you have data about how things happen and when they happen, not necessarily why they happen, and you can make decisions that use that data to do things more effectively, then you will be able to make changes that really make a difference to people. So a company like Microsoft can help with data analytics and certainly those kinds of tools. But we also, I think, help mostly by partnering with local organizations who are closest to the people who know what the problems are. And I think in Chicago, I think Bruce Montgomery is still here somewhere from Englewood Blue. He runs an accelerator in the Englewood section of Chicago. A section that's been historically underrepresented and disadvantaged. And by partnering with him and his organization and bringing opportunities to that community, we learn a lot about how technology can help, and hopefully we give people technology that can help them build businesses, gain skills, and go forward. So it's really a cycle. It's not a one-way street.
And do you feel as if Microsoft does know now who those people are locally, the community organizations, and you're trying to work with them?
I think in the cities where we have teams on the ground, we do. I think in other cities, it's a matter of getting out there and trying to learn, and frankly, figuring out how to scale this.
So Jen, I'm going to ask you that same question from IBM's point of view with this bonus question too, which is in your role as having seen some global efforts of using technology for civic good, are there any international examples that could usefully be applied in the United States of the way that technology has improved the texture of civic life?
There's lots of international examples. How they can be applied in the US, we'll see.
Yeah.
Porto Alegre, Brazil is probably my favorite. Some of you may be familiar with Porto Alegre. They've practiced the great democratic experiment of participatory budgeting, and they've done that for a long time. 25 years ago, it was about people going around and actually going out to favelas and communities and talking about what kind of budget they'd want. Now they've tried to figure out how to address it with a 1.5 million population. So we've worked with them on intelligent operations centers and using social media to be able to go out. And they've made major transformations in the way that small communities, very small block level communities, are appropriating their portion of the budget on things like schools, healthcare, public safety, and the like. And it's made a significant difference. The other piece that I think is important to comment on is we're talking about citizen engagement through this, right? Through communicating through your handheld or your laptop. The Internet of Things changes that. The way that, people who are under-resourced are able to participate civically doesn't necessarily, they don't even know they're doing it. So in Louisville, Kentucky, we did a project there where children who are issued asthma inhalers, they have the highest rate of childhood asthma, had chips on them. So that when a kid has an asthma attack and they take a hit off of their puffer, the city in Louisville and NIH and Asthmopolis, an NGO that works with them, are able to do data analytics to say, where was this kid? What temperature was it? What buildings were by them? What time of day? What traffic? What other elements were happening? So you can pinpoint the issues there. One last example, in Glasgow, Scotland, about a third of the population spends over 25% of their income on fuel in a state called fuel poverty. And the combination of poorly insulated homes, an incredibly cold environment, and then bad utilities have addressed this. So there, what technology can do for poor people isn't about them reporting anything on a smartphone. It's about their utility company implementing smart grids and being able to tell them, here are the appliances in rank order that are costing you the most energy. And if you washed your clothes at this time of day rather than that time of day, here's how much you could save. And here's what you could get so that they can make informed choices with very, very limited resources. So I completely agree that when you're in survival mode, do you have time to sit down with a handheld and say, oh, here's my dissertation on how my community could be better governed? No. But I think the Internet of Things will continue to radically change that dialogue.
Yeah.
And to extend that question back to Lauren again, we've heard these examples from Glasgow and from Brazil and all the rest. Are the people in charge of Detroit's civic reemergence, are you thinking of these international examples too, or is Detroit's situation so special that it's a case unto itself?
I think every situation is unique. I think one thing that's missing is the people that are most greatly impacted by this technology that we're trying to create aren't in the room. Do you know what I mean? So I know some people, not the group that's here, but I have a different group of millennial friends that were working on transportation, and they took a bunch of people up north and they had this powwow and they were going to write some policy. I said, did you have anybody there that actually uses public transportation? Not a single one. They invited all these mover shaker, technology app designers, but not a single person that actually used public transportation, and they're trying to solve a public transportation problem. And that model gets replicated on any problem that we have.
And it's an issue that long predates the technology revolution, of course. I have another question about the technology and civic life question for all of you. So I work for The Atlantic magazine. We had one very successful cover story 4 or 5 years ago, which I had the pleasure of presenting to Google's CEO. It was called, "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" That was one where whether searching was sort of destroying people's recall ability. We had another one called, "Is Facebook Making Us Lonely?" The idea that you had virtual friends, not real friends. There may be one of the works, is Twitter destroying our brains or whatever. As you think about the emergence of virtual communities, whether they're Facebook or whatever else, what is the evidence about whether they help, harm, or do nothing about the other forms of actual civic engagement? I'll start with you.
Yeah, well, Yeah, Facebook, I think there's a lot of potential. Facebook really doesn't have a local component, so that's a really a missing ingredient right there. I hope that's something they're going to be looking at.
So if you were working as a community organizer, you lived for a long time in Montana.
Yeah.
Suppose you were doing some community organizing in Montana. What would be the balance between online and in-person organizing you'd be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think just actually speaking to our research, people were really reluctant to voice their opinion online. And so I think that's a real challenge. How do we create environments and spaces where people feel comfortable and they're not going to be shouted down unless they had sort of an expertise or felt like they were an authority in a particular area. So that, they reluctant to post about political things or even civic related things on Facebook and in other forums because it's made them feel bad or embarrassed. And so that's a real challenge to like try and think about how does that sort of interaction affect people. I think for us in this room, we're all sort of thought leaders and we're always sharing our opinions and so forth. But for
to a fault.
Yeah, but for interested bystanders, which we're saying is about 50% of the population, this is something that's a real challenge for them.
And obviously, I'm going to come back to Lauren in a second on this, but I'm going to give you a time by turn to Anne-Marie. What is your sense, either personally or corporately, on this question about whether real engagement, real communities are being helped, harmed, or neither?
I think it's a really interesting question, and honestly, it's one I've never thought of quite that way before. I mean, I think that there is no substitute for a real community and for people sitting down and talking to each other and hashing out ideas, and I think we see that in virtually every walk of life. But I'd be really interested in what John thinks about this too, but I also wonder if there's a generational thing going on here too, where younger people are much more drawn to social media and the technological interaction, and that for them that's such second nature that there is no barrier created by that, but in fact it's easier. And I don't know, maybe your research looked into that. So I guess to answer the question, I don't think it's destroying or replacing real in-person engagement, but I think from my perspective, it's a great supplement to it.
And just to say one thing here, more in my own experience, I've been a very early adapter of technology. I think The Atlantic had the very first website on any publication. I was using email back in the MCI mail days, but I'm newly impressed as time goes on by the importance of in-person communication experience. That's what reporters do. I was impressed when I actually worked at Microsoft on the programming team for a while, and their emphasis on having people in one place so they could work things out. So, Lauren, as you observe your native community, are the real networks and communities and engagements that happens here helped, hurt, or indifferent by the virtual electronic communities that emerge?
Well, I think you need both. If we're talking about Detroit in particular, we're thinking about people that are illiterate, living in poverty. Like, when I'm in hard financial times, my internet is the first to go. You know what I mean? I can get in the car and drive to the coffee shop, no big deal. But so if I, in my middle class existence, have that problem, I'm thinking of, the rest of the people that have those compounded issues. So how are they going online to look for this event that might help them? I don't know. I think you kind of need both, though. And when people are trying to convene groups of the community, when they're like, why didn't anybody come? I'm like, did you only advertise on Facebook? You have to try and hit people from multiple angles, and I think a big hurdle exists for people in actually talking to people that don't look like them. So it's hard to conceive of going into a community and inviting someone that doesn't look like you to an event that may produce some service that benefits them, but it's hard for people to even think that way. I'm just going to send out this invite online. It's much safer than actually going somewhere that you haven't been and talking to people that you don't know, even though you're professing to want to assist them in some way.
Just to follow up on 2 points there, your point about the internet being first to go. One reason for libraries being so important now is where you go there, the computers are just full of people and using the computers or the Wi-Fi. The other is talking about the difficulty of going into communities and asking directly, we all despise politicians. That's the American way. We always have. Something, I once worked in politics, something I really respect about politicians is they have to go out there to different people and ask them for support. That's a hard thing to do that even the worst politician is forced to do. So we should respect that at least. So Jen Crozier, on this point, do you think help, hurt, or just change on the idea of real communities and virtual communities?
I think we're at the very beginning of knowing sort of the anthropological impact of all of this. It's so early still. I completely agree that it has to be multimodal and that we can't just rely simply on technology. To that end, there's pros and cons, right? There are voices that are heard through social. Women, introverts, people from different cultures who aren't naturally extroverted or
Neo-Nazis,
outspoken.
you know.
A whole variety of people. So you lift up certain voices that you might not hear otherwise. The other thing that's been really interesting for us is, and this is not on the national stage, but at the local stage, the lifting up of the middle. So when you have an issue that divides a community, you often get the people who are very pro and very con, who show up to protest or show up at City Hall and sign the petitions and do the things. And then you have this middle group who are doing their jobs and raising their kids and living their lives, who may not make it to City Hall at 8 p.m. at night and may not sign the petition. Social, I think, gives a way for them to weigh in and for it to become a much more full-bodied conversation around an issue. I also think the research, John, you were talking about people's civic engagement is just taking a much more robust form, and they may not identify it in the traditional ways, but they're heavily engaged, and I think social is really encouraging that as well.
So I'm just about to turn to all of you for questions. I'm going to ask for just like a sentence or two answer from each of you while you all are composing your questions to this query, which is 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what would be the thing you would most hope for in the way that new technological tools have enhanced civic engagement or public life? Start with you.
That they have helped people become more aware, really aware of what's happening locally in their communities, and that they have a vested sort of stake, and they can see the effects of their participation, whether that's in associational life, coming out in some sort of community engagement, voting in local elections, and seeing the level of voting in local elections go up dramatically.
Good. Emery.
I'd say two things, or maybe two sides of the same coin. One, that everyone is using data, both citizens and government, to decide what they think the best policies are and to make decisions accordingly or to vote with that in mind.
Good luck.
So yeah, I know. And the other side would be that citizens are generally much more engaged. Yeah. So we don't see 40% voting or whatever in presidential elections. We see much more interest, and at a local level, it's even higher.
Thanks. Lauren.
That's a tough one. I have so many things. The first one that pops into my mind is that I would hope that new technology is designed in a more accessible way. Sometimes I think that designers design for other designers, but always keep in mind like the least among us that really need access to what that technology can provide. So just more accessible design.
Jen.
Yeah, I agree. Human-centered design. That which supports and empowers the best of being human, and in the places where humans fail or needs help, that they can get support from technology.
Great, thank you. So if you have questions from the audience, please raise your hand. Yes, Mike, yes, wait for the microphone to go to you. Yes, go ahead.
Hello, is it on?
Yes,
My name is Lisa Lilliland with Mango Networks from Boston, and I wanted to share with Lauren and the rest a really cool app that really helps the public and people that need it. It's called Be My Eyes. It's out of Copenhagen, Denmark, and it allows sighted people, any of us can help blind people anywhere in the world. It's through live video chat. My husband's from Copenhagen, and he drops everything when the phone rings, and he knows it's a blind person. They've called from several countries, and he's their eyes. It could be as simple as, this is my refrigerator. Is the milk expired too? I'm lost. I'm in the middle of Manhattan. Can you tell me where I am? And that is, I think, a great example. It's Be My Eyes. Anyone can download it and help blind people.
Thank you. Very interesting. Yes. Oh, yes. I can't see. Okay. Yes. So since I cannot see the. That's good. Is there anyone down on the main floor who would like to ask a question? Yes. Yes. There's a question back here in the third row, lady in black, or in some dark fabric.
Hi there, my name is Renee Ferguson, and I'm a community coordinator in my neighborhood. Just wanting to know how to engage seniors. Are there any suggestions on ways to engage seniors?
That's a
Yeah.
great question.
Go.
But you
No,
wanna go ahead?
please.
No. And in fact, Shelley Stern-Greach, who's here from our Chicago team, has been working on an initiative to engage seniors in Chicago. That is a horribly underserved population and people who could really benefit by technology on many levels. I mean, just from a safety point of view, from a convenience point of view. But honestly, you should talk to her because she knows how she's doing it and I don't.
And Jen, did you have an answer to this? Yeah.
Well, what jumped to my mind was healthcare, so less about
Yeah.
civic engagement, but ways that, technology and particularly social are helping with remote healthcare for seniors and connecting them to their own families and communities in some really interesting ways.
Yeah, I would just add,
Yeah.
trying to ask them what are the issues and things that are really important to them, and try and tap into that to attract them to the types of events that you want to engage them in.
Great. Yes, there's a young woman back here. Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Shalita, and I'm a graduate student here at Wayne State University. And my question is to Lauren. You talked a lot about the unique experiences of Detroit as we were discussing the relevance or accessibility challenges of technology in this new Detroit. So you're sitting on a panel with representatives of 3 major
I know, right?
technological organizations in this country and globally as well. If you had to offer them nuggets of advice to make this conversation about technology accessible, human-centered, relevant, so that all voices are included,
Yeah.
what might that advice be to each of these wonderful
bless your
technological
heart. What
giants?
a great question. You have to go to where the people are. So we can't hang out at the technology conference in the law school at the university and think that we're going to get all the input that we need to do the best that we can do. We got to cross that threshold into the scary place. Let's go. I'll set it up. I'll call some people in a community on the far east side
Well-
and say, bring us your most long-time stakeholders and tell us what the problems are over here. And being technology experts, we can figure out how those are addressed through technology.
So I think you have a response. Jen.
Yeah, no,
Oh,
I
sorry.
mean, challenge accepted, right? So,
Let's go. We've got a bus.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
well, no, so
I love it.
So literally, I think the program I'm talking about, and this is the philanthropic piece of IBM and not the whole corporation, but we've decided to take 6 of our top talent revenue-producing executives and send them here for 3 weeks at full pay and full benefits.
Where do they
And
live?
yesterday, they were in Bagley. And they are looking in all sorts of different neighborhoods right now and dealing with debris. Yesterday, they had on desk masks, and they were in the homes looking at debris removal and how it's done, and homes of all different forms. And they will be interviewing all sorts of community members, and anyone that you want to add to that list, that team is here 24/7 for the next 3 weeks exactly to work on that problem. Yes?
And so, Anne-Marie, did you want to speak for Microsoft on this, or will you speak for Microsoft on this?
I will, and I think that the point that Lauren made about go to where the people are is exactly what we try to do in the cities we are. And I think it's very much about not us walking into the neighborhood saying, how can we help you? We're from Microsoft, we're here to help. It's more going with a local partner, someone who's of that community already, who is really the person who brings us with goodwill to figure out how to solve the problem. So I totally agree. You have to go to where people are and not come as a top-down kind of solution provider, but be there to listen and learn and then figure out what you have to offer.
Good. We have time for one more question from the gentleman in the front. And wait for the microphone, please. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yes. So we have 1 and then 2. Yeah.
Sure.
And actually, how about if we take you each ask your question, and then we'll have answers to both of them. Yes.
That's fine.
Great.
Thank you very much. Andrew Humphrey, WDIV, Tech Time with Andrew Humphrey. Does part of that solution also include maybe creating this involves children and reaching schools and teaching them some of this technology firsthand and building a pipeline from pre-K all the way through elementary school and eventually through undergraduate and graduate school to help empower those communities and help encourage those students to actually stay in those communities once they graduate.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, and I know my colleagues at Google and Microsoft all have portfolios of things that we do around literacy in K through 12. One of the things I'm proudest of at IBM right now is that we have partnered with the City of New York, originally Mayor Bloomberg, as well as City University of New York, to build a school in Brooklyn called P-Tech, which is a 9 through 14 school. So it addresses students who were graduating from high school, going to community college without the skills to be able to graduate. Our average rate of graduation from community college in this country is 30%. And so IBM partnered with the City of New York to say, what skills would we have to teach students between grades 9 and 14 so that they would be desired hires on the other end? We've provided mentors to all 200 students in those schools, and we've raised our hand to hire them on the other side. That model has been so successful over the last several years that it's now been replicated in Connecticut. Governor Cuomo has funded 24 schools across New York. President Obama has provided a $100 million grant program across the United States. Prime Minister Abbott in Australia is coming to pick it up for Australia, and South Korea is in conversations as well. We think it's really taking hold. We're not in Detroit yet, but watch out. I hope so, because it builds the skills that students need to get the kind of jobs, not any job, the kind of job that can feed a family of 4.
We have less than 1 minute of actual time or of official time, so
That's
please.
okay. Graves D. Armand. I'm a Southwest Detroit resident, and I know Google has an office in Detroit. IBM has a presence in the metro area. Is Microsoft or IBM looking at moving any offices into Detroit, maybe so we have some more tech foundation and moving in that area that we have a real growth rate right now and a lot of training going on with Tech Town here associated with Wayne State and that kind of economic growth as well.
For Microsoft, it's a great question, and I'm not the right person to answer it. But you know, it has been a wonderful experience for us to be here, but the Tech and Civic Engagement team, and we certainly want to do something. We've talked to Beth Niblock about, and some folks. Oh, we do have some folks here. Sorry.
Right.
We do have some folks who are Microsoft people that are in Detroit, for sure.
Hi, I'm Donna Bank, Community Manager here for
There we go.
Microsoft.
Yeah.
We have a technology center that's in Southfield, but we also have an office in the Madison building too for our tech startups.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
We are, yeah, go ahead.
I told you I wasn't the right person to answer that.
Great. So we're over our official time here, but please join me in thanking our excellent panelists, Jen Kruger, Lauren Hood, Anne-Marie Levins, and John Webb. Thanks.
As you guys are getting up, I just want to point out, you know, that the question was really legitimate about, you know, getting down and dirty with the real people. But it's amazing that these 3 companies have people that can come here whose job is civic engagement and innovation. That is basically a new thing. I mean, I think Esther's nodding too. That 10 years ago, these companies did not have civic engagement. This is generally a nonprofit activity. You know, these companies are hoping to sell some stuff here and there on the margins, but it's quasi-philanthropic at least. And I think it's quite interesting that Google, Microsoft, and IBM can all send such eminently qualified experts that they're paying high salaries to engage in this stuff, which is just something worth mentioning. Anyway.